Hello everyone, and welcome to the top 5 list of the worst units in the Vampire Coast roster. In today's video, we're going to be talking about those units that kind of fell a little bit flat on their face, and essentially they aren't really good in multiplayer or in the campaign. So without further ado, let's jump right into this video and have some fun. And coming in with that good and tasty number 5 spot, we do have the Deck Dropper Bombers. So when you compare these guys to their cousins, which are the pistol variant and the handgun variant, they are just such a limp noodle. They have two major problems. So number one, they have very low ammunition. As you can see here over on the tooltip, they only have 7 shots. And what they're really designed to do is kill hordes of squishy infantry. So if you're fighting Greenskins or Norska, for example, you're going to have Orc Boys, you're going to have Goblins, a lot of pretty juicy targets, right? Because their armor piercing is very low on the bombers. If we go ahead and take a look at the missile damage, you can see the AP is, it's pretty much non-existent, right? But their explosive damage is supposed to be really good. Therefore, they're designed to kill lightly armored chaff units, but they don't even do that well. Their ammunition is very low, but it seems like despite, the damage looking okay on the missile damage, whenever you put them on a group of berserkers or anything that's squishy, the ideal target essentially, they just seem to essentially be a wet noodle and barely do any damage. So these guys, in my experience, have definitely been a disappointment. Now, the reason they're number 5 on the list and not higher up is because they're still deck droppers at their very core, which means they're mobile, they have 90 speed, even if the bombs don't do a lot of damage. You're still essentially getting a group of fellbats that can harass artillery pieces and missile pieces. So they do still bring some utility, but again, the bomb aspect of them is very, very just weak. It just doesn't seem to do a lot of damage. And unfortunately, they do run out of ammunition rather quick. So they're going to be claiming the number 5 spot, and let us go ahead and jump over to number 4. And coming in with the number 4 spot on our list, we do have the animated Hulks. And just taking one look at these guys, you can see there's a little bit of a cry for help going on. He's like, please buff me, I am so useless.
I'm too weak. Don't kill me, please.
It's kind of the expression he has on his face there. But regardless, as far as multiplayer goes, these guys do have some applications. So for example, you can put them in the front line on top of your deckhand mobs, and it does give you some decent armor piercing. So if you're facing off against vampire counts, you can probably expect a bunch of the Graveguard, right? Very heavily armored frontline monsters. And these guys do bring a little bit of armor piercing to the front line, and they're also very cheap, but just really at their core, I mean, they're just so squishy if you're facing off against any faction with missiles. Pretty much anyone that can throw a pebble at you, for like Skaven, for example. These guys are just going to die instantly. They have 20 armor, and they just go down just so incredibly fast. On top of that, they only have 20 melee defense, so even if they're fighting chaff, I have a feeling that these guys would actually lose against like chaff infantry. I feel like a group of like clan rats might be able to almost bring them down. They are just too squishy, too vulnerable to, against missiles to be useful in a multitude of different matchups. And on top of that, it just seems their damage output isn't the best. I mean, they only have 30 melee attacks, and when they're fighting against things like Graveguard, the shielded armored infantry, Chaos Warriors do have 44 armor. It just seems that they really struggle to make contact. Now, if these guys did cause terror, I think they might be a bit of a better pick, right? Because you have things like Sirens who cause terror in the front line. So even if their output isn't the best, they're going to be that perpetual threat of terror, which can buckle a flank or kind of help you secure part of your formation. But these guys, I mean, look at this thing. He should definitely cause terror. I mean, look at that. He only causes fear, and Sirens, which are admittedly quite scary, right? They're like these spooky ghosts, but I mean, these guys are way more terrifying. Just look at them. They have like all kinds of appendages and barnacles, and for anyone with trypophobia, I believe is what it's called. I mean, they're definitely pretty disturbing, but nonetheless, I feel like ultimately they just can't really be used in any situation in which your opponent has any sort of missile play. Yes, they're very cheap. I think they cost like 700 or 800, but nonetheless, they still are just better options. Mourngulls are better. Your powder is obviously one of the better ways to deal with armor. You have the handguns. You just have so many other options for dealing with armor. And I really think these guys are very lackluster. They die very quick. And it seems like they almost never pay for themselves. I don't think I've had a game on ladder where they get more than like 20 or 30 kills tops. And that's even against like chaff. Like I feel like clan rat spears, like even standard skeletons from the vampire counts, I feel like could beat these guys. I haven't done the testing to kind of back that up, but it's just kind of an internal feeling. But yeah, man, they are such a cool looking unit. You got to give it up for Creative Assembly for the design on these guys. And as far as their campaign applications go, there's always better choices. Like, why would you bring these guys when you could bring Mourngulls, who are heavy armor piercing for barely any more cost? And they also, I believe Mourngulls do cost terror, and they have a bonus force infantry. So unfortunately, these guys are just kind of the limp monstrosities here. But, they look really cool. And if you want to have a little bit of fun and mix them in, I actually do have one build in my Vampire Coast matchup guide I'm working on that does use these guys against vampire counts. They can be okay. But again, I still think they deserve a spot on this list. And the Vampire Coast roster as a whole is quite good, in my opinion. There's a lot of solid units for sure. So these are the number 4 units here on the list, the animated Hulks. And we're going to be jumping over to number 3. So we'll see you guys soon. Let's say like 200, well, 200 would be really cheap. They would be super abusable, but let's say they cost like 400 or 500 in multiplayer. They might be something to actually look at, but based on their current cost, they just don't pay for themselves. On top of that, most players on ladder are going to be pretty efficient with their missiles. They're going to be shooting at the corpse and destroying it before it gets there, or they're going to use high mass units. So any lord, for example, if you have a lord on a horseback, a hellsteed, any sort of a dragon, you can simply intercept the corpse and force it to blow up essentially immediately. And it doesn't really do any damage against lords. You guys probably remember a battle I had on the channel where I sent it against Archaon Everchosen. I'm like, oh yeah, this is going to do a bunch of damage. It has huge armor piercing, but alas, it didn't really do anything when it blew up. So multiplayer, not really the most effective choice or way to spend your funds, but if you're looking to have some fun and meme, and now don't get me wrong, I actually had a game on ladder a couple days ago where I just built my entire army around the corpse, right? So I got like Rotting Leviathans and Necrofex Colossus, and I stacked in a blob. So my opponent then swarmed me in a bit of a circle, right? He blobbed everything up on my characters. I was able to send in the corpse, so I had hiding in a tree nearby and get massive value. I mean, it won me the game, but I was also had to build my entire army around it. I had to be on the proper map, and my opponent didn't discover it. He didn't see it as it was approaching. He pretty much was so focused on killing my blob that it was then kind of able to work. It wasn't like a huge thing, but it did pay for itself in that situation. But it's pretty much too circumstantial. There's too many what ifs, too many variables that need to be met to make this thing useful in multiplayer. As far as campaign goes, it dies in every single auto resolve. And it's basically just taking these slots of very valuable units. Now, the one place in campaign in which it does have some application is in the very early game. So when you go with Luther Harkin, for example, to conquer the dinosaurs, their swords are very tough to kill for some of your depth guard can handle swords very efficiently, but for your deckhand mobs. So you can send in a Morgul Haunter, you can get your Lord, let him get surrounded by Saurus, and then send in bloated corpses. Or if you're on a choke point battle, they can do pretty good. But for the most part, still just take up a slot. It's better just to get depth guard or pretty much anything else in their position that isn't going to die in auto resolves. And yeah, that's pretty much my 2 cents. But a very fun unit. By far one of the coolest things on the roster. Such a meme, and really looking forward to using this bad boy a little bit more. So let's go ahead and jump over to the number 2 spot. And coming in with the number 2 spot here on the list, we do have the Zombie Pirate Gunnery mobs with the hand cannons. These guys are certainly a disappointment in both campaign as well as multiplayer. So let's actually go ahead and begin by talking about multiplayer. So firstly, they do have 90 range, which is pretty much the same as the pistol variant. So the Zombie Pirate Gunnery mobs with the pistols, they cost 300 gold, they can shoot while moving, and they're really good at just kind of leveling cheap infantry, which is with the sheer volume of fire. And these guys, on that same note, should essentially fit the same role, right? They have short range, they have 90 range, which is the same. They cannot fire while moving, so they're not as efficient in that respect. You can't reposition them or chase something down and shoot them. And these guys with these giant hand cannons should have these amazing shotgun blasts. And they do have the shotgun effect. You can see there's a bit of a spray of fire when it comes out. But from my experience, it just doesn't do that much damage, number one. And number two, they get obstructed so easy. The pistol variant seems to be able to kind of keep shooting and moving even when there's a little bit of obstruction. But these guys, for the same cost as the handguns, which are by far one of the best units on the roster, the handguns I think are just so damn good. But these guys really just aren't that good up close. They get obstructed. Their damage seems extremely limp. And the only time I've had any success with them in multiplayer is really getting them up and around the side of a unit and shooting down the formation. But that requires you to maneuver, right? And they're zombies. They have 23 speed. They do not maneuver well. And, you know, it's just so many variables to get them to work. And even when they do work, you don't want to be maneuvering up and around the side of something with Zombie Pirate Gunnery mobs, these ones especially, because that's putting them in a vulnerable position. It's getting them closer to the front line. Typically with the Vampire Coast, you have to play a little bit more defensively, more of a reactionary style of play. And these guys are just not conducive to that. Their damage output sucks, they get obstructed, and they are just a disappointment for the amount of gold they cost. Now, if they're a little bit cheaper, maybe if they cost something between, let's say, the 300 of the standard gunnery mobs and the 550 of the variant with the handguns, I think they might be a little bit better. But even still, the damage just isn't that good. I've done quite a bit of testing of them against like lightly armored infantry, just standing there and letting them shoot them. And the damage output just doesn't seem that good for the cost. So unfortunately, they're going to be earning the number 2 spot here on the list. I do think the Bloated Corpse is even more useful because, if, for example, if you're playing against Chaos and they come in with Chosen, at least maybe the Corpse can kill like half of a group of Chosen, and that makes your battle a little bit more winnable. But these guys are just not going to do much. I mean, when you're going to invest in guns, you want to get the handguns because they can just pound armor. They have really good range at 140. That range is going to make them do even more damage in the long run because they can hit fleeing targets, they can hit flying targets. These guys, for the same cost as handguns, just do so much less and are, pretty close to useless in my opinion. Maybe some other people have made them work, but in my anecdotal experience, these guys just definitely suck. But it's a shame because I think it's a really cool concept. I mean, just look how cool these guns are here. They have these like giant shotguns. I want to see them just like, if they can get that line of sight, if they're not obstructed. I understand the obstruction, right? They're these massive shotguns. They don't want to be blasting into the backs of their own troops. But let's just say there's a group of Skaven slaves charging them. I want them to eradicate those guys. Just in 1 or 2 volleys, just put them in a trash can and really shine at their respective role. Because as they are now, I feel like they're a little bit limp. So they're going to be earning the number 2 spot. So guys, the moment you've all been waiting for, the number 1 spot. Without further ado, let's find out who it is. We are the champions, my friends, and we'll keep on sucking till the end. The number one spot, we have the zombie pirate gunnery mobs with the bombers. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that bit of a musical introduction there, but I do think that these guys do deserve the number one spot. So the bombers, I think they could be fixed very easily. Look at their combat stats. They have 8 melee attack, 7 melee defense, 15 weapon strength, and they only have 3 shots of their bombs. Now, I actually did a couple tests with these guys against like skink cohorts and some very squishy infantry, and typically they get like 1 or 2 bombs off. It might bring them down to like 60%, but then they're out of bombs, and they're essentially like a useless tar pit unit. They are just so bad. They're even weaker than the vampire count zombies. These guys are, I think they're pretty much useless in every format. In campaign, they're not very good. Even if you invest in upgrades and ammunition stuff for these guys, they still kind of suck. And in multiplayer, these guys are just absolute trash. I mean, they're meant to kill lightly armored infantry, but for that, you have the standard pistol mob, which is cheaper, more efficient. They can shoot while moving. You can put them in guard mode. They can fight in melee and keep shooting their pistols, but these guys are just so useless. They have 3 volleys of their bombs, and they just barely do anything. They're just such an incredibly limp noodle, which is one of my favorite expressions to describe these terrible units. But something I think that should be done, because they're really cool conceptually speaking. They could definitely fill a very cool niche. They should be made into zombie pirate deckhand mobs with bombs. Just make them like miners with blasting charges. That would be really cool. That would actually give the Vampire Coast another mid-range option, aside from just having, let's say the zombie deckhand mobs from the polearms, and then depth guard on the far end of the spectrum. Make them cost like maybe 350, 375, or something in between the standard deckhand mobs and the polearms, and give them a couple charges of bombs. Even reduce it by like 1, or maybe just give them 1 volley or 2 volleys, because the bombs don't do the worst damage in the world, but still, it's a little bit lackluster. And after they get their bombs off, which can barely finish off a group of some of the worst infantry in the game, they're pretty much useless. I would really like to see these guys be changed into something that's very similar to miners with blasting charges. So why not zombie pirate deckhand mobs with bombs? Like, it makes sense, right? They have their cutlass, they have their melee gear, they have a bomb on their belt they can grab and throw. I think that would be a really cool niche for these guys, because right now they're pretty much useless in both campaign and multiplayer. So guys, that's going to be it. These guys are our grand champions, the zombie pirate gunnery mobs with bombs here. Definitely a bit of a disappointment, but they look cool. And maybe someday, hopefully some people hear this feedback, maybe we can get them changed. I think it'd be really cool to give the zombie pirates a bit of a miner with blasting charge type unit in the front line. So the grand champions of the day, zombie pirate gunnery mobs with the bombs. And thank you guys so much for joining. If there's any other lists you guys would like to see, like, maybe some of the best units on the roster, what do I think are the best? I could definitely do that, because Vampire Coast have some really strong units. And for the most part, I think their roster is very good. Most of the units have applications in different matchups, and they have some of the best legendary lords in the game. So I definitely think Vampire Coast is in a pretty good place in terms of balance, but it's always really fun to talk about the worst units, right? And, of course, I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you guys think the list should have been in a different order, if you think certain units belonged on the list that you didn't see here, please let me know in the comment section below. So guys, thanks again so much for watching, and we will see you guys next time.